Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you are here with us at our third annual Black Women Green Future Awards ceremony. I am thrilled to be here to honor our awardees. My name is Ebony Flowers, and I am humbled to be New Voices Environmental Justice Advocate. I am thrilled to be with you this evening to celebrate the incredible accomplishments of four Black leaders we are gathered to honor. I want to extend a deep, heartfelt thank you to each of the honorees, speakers, and artists you'll hear from tonight for their passion and relentless work on behalf of environmental justice, reproductive justice, and racial equity. This event would not exist without them. This year's theme, Rooted in the Earth, honoring the legacies of Black environmental leaders, is our way of continuing the work to uncover the stories of Black folk and their contributions to environmentalism. Let me make one thing very clear. We've always been a part of environmental history. When disasters ensue, we are on the front lines, but our stories aren't told, and we are often ignored, silenced, and our efforts unappreciated. Working in the environmental field, I am often reminded of how white this space is. I can recall when I was the only Black student in a science class or the only Black employee at an environmental organization. This has always pushed me to uplift our stories and to be unapologetically Black in any space that I'm in. I am empowered by the fact that our ancestors were also environmental champions who took care of the land in their own way. Even now, Black folk are changing the environmental field in every aspect, be it ecology, science, fashion, art, and beyond. Our goal for this ceremony tonight is not to only recognize the achievements of the four awardees, but to also recall us to our roots. But before we move forward, we must honor the land, express gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory we reside on, and respect the indigenous people who have lived and worked on it from the very beginning. I am delighted to introduce you to New Voices Policy Manager, Cheyenne Wizard Jones.
Hello and good evening. My name is Cheyenne Wizard Jones, and I am the Policy Manager for New Voices for Reproductive Justice. I am thrilled to welcome you this evening as we celebrate the incredible accomplishments of four Black women leaders we are gathered to honor tonight. I'm here to open up this space for the honoring, history, and acknowledgement of the first stewards of the lands where New Voices centers our work in. We lift up the Lenape Nation in Philadelphia, the Osage and Shawnee Nations in Pittsburgh, and the Erie, Kaskaskia, and Mississauga Nations in Cleveland. We know that due to colonial treaties and occupational violence, there is a range of diverse ancestries and tribal affiliations, some of which were not shared this evening. Each of these lands hold their own history and their own knowledge of what land restoration and environmental justice means. To view the native lands that you occupy and the history of those lands, we ask that you visit nativeland.ca on the app or via a website. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I will hand it back over to Ebony to continue our show.
Thank you so much, Cheyenne. Next, you will hear the spoken word by two dynamic artists, Steph Ox and Lene. They will recite their piece, The Black Woman.
Black woman be the soil, black woman in the lead, black woman wears her crown, black woman be the queen. Black woman be the pot to your flowers, her melanin charged by the sun, never having to ask the time her skin reads golden hour. Even in the rain, her braids be the branches for new leaves, showering her roots to bear fruit, her breasts possess the God-given power to feed. Once forbidden, now forgiven, her womb still enduring the decisions of Eve. Black woman be the soil, black woman in the lead, black woman wears her crown, black woman be the queen. And her strength, beginning at the soles of her feet, planted to birth innovative ideas with faith of a mustard seed, and her ability to execute and bloom to the top of her fro, reaching as high as the trees. Her whole body breathes life, her existence the oxygen we need, and eyes that tell you stories explaining her hardcover. A protector of her garden, her nurturing spirit exudes mother.
Black woman be the soil, black woman in the lead. Black woman always gets the shrubs while everyone else gets the trees. But who gives a black woman exactly what she needs? Self-care starts at the root. A black woman knows her power comes from planting her own seeds. So behind every beautiful black woman's garden is a powerful one clipping her own weeds. Never polluted with doubt. A black woman's confidence is always green. Because a black woman who constantly pours into herself is a black woman who will forever succeed. Self-care, balanced energy, a black woman will forever be in her own lead. Black woman be the soil, black woman in the lead, black woman wears her crown, black woman be the queen.
That was good. Thank you so much, y'all. All right, next is our first keynote speaker of the evening. Next, you will hear from Sydney Etheridge. Sydney, in January 2022, became the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood of Western Pennsylvania. Prior to this role, Sydney worked at the intersection of healthcare advocacy and health center operations for over a decade, providing guidance on ways to further embed sexual and reproductive health care in system transformation efforts across the country. Sydney holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in sociology from the University of Pittsburgh and a master's degree in public health and health policy from George Washington University School of Public Health and Health Services.
Good evening. My name is Sydney Etheridge. I use she, her pronouns, and it's an honor to be with all of you tonight. As Ebony mentioned, I'm the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood of Western Pennsylvania. To get to be here and talk about the reproductive rights and justice movements and its deep connection to the environmental rights and justice movements on Earth Day is a true privilege that is not lost on me. Getting to be in spaces like this, it's what the work is about. When I came on board in January of 2022, I only had 6 months to come up with a plan to prepare for the fall of Roe while learning the team, our business model, and the landscape of partners and relationships out here in Western Pennsylvania. And while that was important and essential work that needed to be done, ideally, I would have been able to focus more on building connections and talking about broader issues that not just impact our work, but impact the larger movement we are trying to build at this crucial time. So tonight, it feels like I finally get to do that work, now more important than ever. With all that is going on in our state, country, and world, and all that is at stake for our state, country, and world, having discussions that highlights our connections and bonds are much needed and welcome during a time when it feels like so many are trying to divide us. Now, when I was first thinking about this speech, of course, what came to mind are some of the current intersections between our two movements. That the pillars of reproductive justice include the right to raise families in safe communities that include safety from pollutants, toxins, and the impacts of climate change. And I know all of you here are far too familiar with the fact that Black women, their families, and communities are disproportionately impacted by exposure to toxins. And I'm sure if they left this open, we could talk about these issues for hours. But when I started to think about the theme of tonight's event, Rooted in the Earth, and the connections between the environmental and reproductive justice movements, their impact on the Black community, and particularly Black women, it felt so much deeper. From the moment Black women were put in chains, we lost all control of our environment, our health, and our reproductive decision making. And that is what connects our movements, that struggle. The earth we tilled, the food we grew, the animals we raised, and the food we cooked was not ours. Yet through that process, we learned. We learned in hopes that one day we could grow, till, raise, and cook all of these things for ourselves, our families, our communities. Similarly, the children that were conceived and birthed, while ours by blood, were not our own, and the children raised by us were those of the oppressor. But we also hoped that one day we would be able to build families and communities truly of our own. And that hope fueled our perseverance. So to be in this space with all of you today is a testimony to how powerful that seed of hope can be. Now, many may say it's that hope that led us to things like the end of slavery, the 14th and 15th Amendments, Brown versus Board of Education, the Fair Housing Act, the list goes on. And many, those in those particularly mainstream movements, would sit back and point to those achievements as victories, to signify how far we have come and to provide hope in the form of policies or legislations to build on for the future. Even both of our movements had pivotal victories in the 1970s that are important to uplift, because while many people saw these policies as progress, Black people, and particularly Black women, knew better. In 1970, the Environmental Protection Agency was created, and Congress passed the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Lead-Based Paint Poisoning Prevention Act, and the Safe Drinking Water Act. Then, in 1973, only 3 years after, the Supreme Court provided the landmark decision in Roe v. Wade that the Constitution of the United States generally protected the right to having an abortion. For most, people thought these policies, and all of them before then, would bring about the hope and progress these mainstream movements were striving for. But for those in the Black and Brown, low income, and historically marginalized communities, we knew these policies, agencies, and laws were only the floor, if that. And that understanding is our connected fight. Because if the Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act were enough, then explain what happened in Flint, Michigan. If the Lead-Based Paint Poisoning Prevention Act were enough, then explain why Black children have the highest blood lead levels in the United States compared to other racial groups. And if Roe was enough, then why were women with low income denied abortion care? Of course, both of our movements are so much more than just these pieces of legislation or law. They are people's everyday lives. And those everyday lives, those are the answers to these questions. And that is the work. It is uplifting those voices. It is essential that we are here together in solidarity to remind people that this work is so much more than a policy, than a rally, than a photo opportunity, but real change that centers Black and Brown people, those most marginalized, in the fight for sustainable solutions. It is the work that all of you are doing every day. And that is why all of you know that this fight will not be easy, because what they are doing to the reproductive rights and justice movement, they will do to every movement if possible. Using a myriad of legislative and legal attacks at every level to keep us distracted and exhausted. We know when people try to hold on to power just how strong that grip could be. And that is what we are seeing now when it comes to access to abortion care, to sexual and reproductive health care, and so many other things we hold true. So let us be the canary in the coal mine, because we know that no matter what anyone says, these bans will not protect mothers and infants. What we are seeing is that the states with the most restrictive abortion laws are also the states with some of the worst maternal and infant outcomes. And it should be no surprise to any of you that states like Louisiana, Ohio, Alabama, and Texas are in the top 10 most polluted states, and were some of the fastest to enact severe abortion bans after the fall of Roe. It's clear that these bans are not about helping people, they are about control. Controlling when people have children, controlling how we raise these children, controlling where we live and how we live. And these are the same tactics that were used from the moment that we as Black people stepped on this continent. But these tactics will no longer work. They cannot work. That hope that our ancestors had is still inside of us, and our collective fight for justice and freedom lives across our movements and beyond. So I want to thank all of you for the work you are doing to keep that hope alive, fueling this movement into the future, and most importantly, rooting us to the earth to ensure that we are grounded and clear-eyed in this fight. So please keep up the amazing work, and congratulations to all of the awardees here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sydney. As Sydney said, we must be clear-eyed in this fight. As a Black woman, we know that we are not the public face of climate change activism or environmentalism, but we are the caretakers of our land and communities, fighting on the front lines without recognition. I am humbled to introduce our four awardees who have shown exceptional leadership and contributions in the fight towards environmental justice. Fawn Walker Montgomery is a community leader, healer, activist, and consultant who is deeply committed to supporting her community, advocating for social justice, promoting Black liberation, and advancing racial equality. She is the principal consultant at Fawn Walker Montgomery Consulting and CEO, co-founder at Take Action Advocacy Group. She was born and raised in McKeesport, Pennsylvania, which has fostered a strong connection to her community and fueled Fawn's passion for activism since a very young age. Gabrielle Gray is a Pittsburgh native, Westinghouse High School graduate, longtime community activist, and founding partner of the Extra Concerned Citizen Group. Based in Homewood, this spurred into action by the injustices she witnessed in her community. Gabby has made environmental reform and people-led solutions her life work. She is a dynamic speaker, connector of people, a movement leader. Gabby has been at the forefront of environmental justice work throughout Pittsburgh and beyond. She currently leads Pittsburgh's Pittsburgh Our Water campaign, fighting for transparency, rate improvements, and improved safety standards from the region's water service providers. Melanie Mead is the daughter of Dr. Thomas B. Mead and Maxine Pipkins. She is a mother, a grandmother, staunch environmental justice activist, neuropath, Reiki practitioner. She graduated from the University of Pittsburgh with a bachelor's in Spanish language and Afro-Latina history. She worked as an administrator at CCAC Pittsburgh and American University, DC. In 2022, she trained as a Climate Reality Project community organizer. Dr. Pamela Talley was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. She has been licensed as a registered nurse in the state of Missouri for over 30 years. She holds a doctorate in nursing practice from the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Her commitment to bettering the community stems from creating community gardens throughout the city of St. Louis for over 30 years. She has taught generations of men, women, and children how to garden. Pamela recognizes that her efforts feed families, teach transferable skills, bind families, and shared experiences that make memories for all involved. Since 2018, she has proudly served on the Environmental Justice Advisory Council for the National Environmental Protection Agency. In this capacity, she continues to raise awareness about the impact of the dangers of food deserts and environmental toxins. Now you will hear from the honorees and what motivates them in this fight for environmental justice. Here is a brief sneak peek into a much needed conversation. And I have one question, and anybody can jump in and answer. Knowing that this work can be frustrating, like Melanie, Fawn, all of you've been saying, and it's hard to get noticed. It's very challenging. What inspires all of you to keep going?
Well, if I don't keep going, I won't be alive.
Period.
That's it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I was gonna say my ancestors, her ancestors,
Mhm. Yes.
inspired me to keep going.
Yeah.
For me, it's my grandchildren. Like I have 3 grandchildren, and depending on where they live will decide what they know and what they have access to. And I think that's an atrocity in 2024 when we claim to be free. So
Yeah.
And I just, for the love of my people, people have a right to have a safe and decent quality life. And so, yeah, that's my inspiration to make it better.
Yeah. And what advice would you give to the generation coming behind you that sees all these things happening and they feel helpless? What advice would you give them to get started or how to keep the momentum going?
I would say to know their why,
Mhm.
to remember why you're doing this, to rest,
Yes.
to breathe, to pause, to be in community with like-minded people.
Mhm.
Kind of find your tribe. Remember that. Don't fall into perfectionism.
I received that, Fawn. Thank you for saying that to me. I need to hear that.
one thing that I would want to say to the youth is that you're not doing this to save anyone but yourself. The idea that we're saving the world and saving others is too heavy of a burden, especially for Black women in Pittsburgh, where we only live, an average life expectancy is 60 years old. I would not continue to do this work if I had the weight of trying to save anyone. I'm merely speaking up for my rights, and I've witnessed enough death that I'm tired of being silent. And so I would say if you see something, say something, stand up, speak up, show up, because we need you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One final question, and then we're going to close it out. If you could have a wand in each of your communities, if you could make a wish, what would your dream community be like in each of your respective communities? What's your vision?
I'd like to say a community that knows its power, a youth who works and respects the elders, and elders who work with and respect the youth, a community that sees the best even in the worst situations and addresses issues before we see tragedy or disaster.
Awesome. Yeah.
I would say a community who loves its neighbors as yourself. And when you do that, you respect them, you do the best for you, you do the best for them. I mean, it starts there. And if there's very little self-love, or if there's no self-love, it's kind of hard to give it back or to do something for others. So, I just think that's part of it, a big part of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I definitely would like to see a climate resilient environmental justice community that's living equally as long as everybody else on the planet Earth. Making sure that we're able to see ourselves in community and able to see our contribution in that space, so that it shows up in that way for the next generation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Our second keynote speaker is up. Born and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Karina Newsom is a wildlife biologist dedicated to the integration of environmental justice and conservation science in practice. Karina earned her bachelor's degree in zoo and wildlife biology from Malone University and her master's degree in biology from Georgia Southern University, where she focused on avian conservation to help birds survive in a changing world. Karina's fascination with birds extends beyond her research into the communities where she lives and works. Understanding that the health of communities on the front lines of environmental crises and the conservation of biodiversity are connected, Karina works at local, regional, and national levels to craft justice-centered, community-focused conservation solutions. In addition to her work as a wildlife scientist, Karina is committed to increasing the representation and visibility of Black science professionals for the next generation of STEM experts and centering the leadership and perspectives of Black, Indigenous, and communities of color in wildlife conservation and environmental education and exploration of the natural world.
Hello, everyone. Ebony, thank you so much for the invitation. It truly is an incredible honor to be among such incredible leaders, thinkers for tonight's awards ceremony. And I want to say a major congratulations to the honorees who are leading such important work in all of their respective communities. I'm grateful to be invited to speak and encouraged greatly by the integrated work of New Voices for Reproductive Justice, as they understand that environmental justice is critical for the liberation of our bodies from harm, especially the bodies of Black women and queer folks. I have to say I was both surprised and deeply encouraged by the invitation to join you all, as to me, it signaled a recognition of the interconnectedness of the environmental justice movement, that it touches every facet of our lives, our bodies, our communities, and biodiversity, the creatures with whom we share the earth. And when I say that, I mean the literal millions of species of birds, plants, mammals, insects, and other beings with whom our fates are intertwined on this planet. As was mentioned, I'm a wildlife biologist, but first and foremost, I'm a Black woman and I'm a Black mother. Immediately upon entering this profession, I realized that in our society, it is much easier to garner protections, support, and even empathy for wildlife like bald eagles and polar bears and dolphins than it is for Black women and their bodies. I also realized that the same pollution that made me and other kids in my neighborhood growing up sick throughout our childhoods, the same pollution that increases the instances of asthma and heart disease in our communities and that harms unborn children and the incredible bodies that create them, the same pollution also lodges itself in the intricate lungs of birds as they soar seemingly weightlessly above our communities. But they're not weightless. The burden of racist, classist destruction of our shared Mother Earth is embedded in their tissues too. This reality is the very one that has led me to understand that even as a wildlife biologist, my work must be guided by and grounded in environmental justice. Even as I am perpetually confronted by people who are in vehement opposition to an environmental movement, and certainly a conservation movement that prioritizes justice for Black, Brown, Indigenous, and low wealth people of all colors. However, I am reminded regularly of and encouraged by the wisdom and leadership of our foremothers and fathers in the civil rights and environmental justice movements, who understood that the health of our environment, of our bodies, of plants and wildlife, the quality of our food, and the liberation of our communities are tied together. I think specifically of the leaders who codified the principles of environmental justice at the first ever People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in 1991, and they captured this interconnectedness. They understood that environmental justice is a right to political and economic self-determination, freedom from the production of hazardous waste, a right to reparations and education about social and environmental issues. They understood environmental justice to be freedom from military occupation and exploitation of land and life of all kinds. And that environmental justice confers on all of us the responsibility to make personal choices that honors our interdependence on and the sacredness of Mother Earth. These foremothers and forefathers include organizers like civil rights leader Fannie Lou Hamer, who carried the scars of racism and sexism in her literal reproductive system. Scientists like George Washington Carver, who, by the way, is so much more than a peanut connoisseur, and leaders who we are blessed to have with us today, especially our youth leaders. And these include incredible organizers and leaders like Latricia Adams and Mari Copeny, who have been fighting for clean water in Black and Brown communities across the country. And just so you know, Mari has been fighting for clean water in Flint, Michigan since she was 6 years old, and now she's 16, just to speak to the dedication of young people. And finally, Justin J. Pearson, a friend of mine and colleague and leader who led his Memphis community to victory against multi-billion-dollar oil companies who were attempting to build a pipeline through their soil and water sources. I recently heard a powerful creation care sermon by an incredible speaker and organizer and pastor, Reverend Dr. Heber Brown III, who is the founder of the Black Church Food Security Network. And his sermon was on redeeming desert places. So often, through a legacy of policy sins, continued harm, and exploitation, our communities are purposely cut off from resources and starved. They are then labeled as desert places. As Reverend Brown stated in his sermon, they point at our communities and they say, there's no life there, and consider our communities to be wastelands. Even in my work in wildlife conservation, I am regularly face to face with people who look at our communities and say, there's no life there. No birds, no mammals, pollinators, plants would make their home among us. They make assumptions about our resolve and call us the path of least resistance. And that is a direct quote from the oil companies who tried to poison that Memphis community. But as Reverend Brown reminded us in this sermon, there is life here, and especially among those of us organizing our communities to fight for our lives. There is life here, a Black Southern community with no political clout or financial resources to fight back against wealthy polluters, but together they won. There is life here, incredible pollinator diversity in segregated St. Louis and all-striking bird diversity in the Black stewarded forests of Southwest Atlanta. There is life here, new voices for reproductive justice, creating safe havens for Black women, queer folks, and marginalized people, and working with the understanding that reproductive justice is impossible without environmental justice. One of the reasons that I love George Washington Carver so much is because of the ways that he so beautifully invites us to look closely at the living things around us. And so in this spirit, I want to end by sharing with you some of the wisdom that we can learn from birds. A friend of mine and colleague named Billy Allman, who specializes in biomimicry and engineering, once shared that murmurations, or the massive, beautiful flocks of blackbirds that dance through skies around the world, are a great demonstration of how we should work together to solve problems. These beautiful spectacles of tens or even hundreds of thousands of birds are actually a mechanism to avoid being caught by hawks and other flying predators. The way that they are able to fly in coordination with one another so acrobatically and seamlessly is that each individual bird is paying closest attention to the birds closest to them. its neighbors, responding to each other's movements with fluidity. This localized attention in the flock scales up to a flock-wide coordination that allows as many as 500,000 birds to dance in the sky as they work together, ensuring no one is caught. We too ought to adopt this strategy, paying closest attention to our neighbors, responding to their needs as they respond to ours. Not only is it incredibly effective, it's beautiful. So again, congratulations to the awardees tonight, and thank you to all of the beautiful Black women who are leading their neighbors, their communities, and the world in the transformative work of justice. Thank you.
Ooh, there is life here. There is life here. And I'm going to say it one more time. There is life here. Thank you so much, Karina, for that message. It was inspiring and it was amazing. And I think we're also going to start taking some questions from the audience. Let's see. No questions yet. Okay. Well, I have a question. With, Pittsburgh and Philly in the house, we have two movements here. I want to know, what can we do to ensure that we continue to work together to free our communities? How do we do that?
Yeah, I can definitely jump in and answer this. This has obviously been something I've been thinking a lot about since coming back to Pittsburgh and being in the space. One of the reasons why it's so exciting to be in this work at this time, even though it's so incredibly daunting, is just realizing how intersectional so many of our movements have become. I think for so long, they just felt so kind of siloed and niche. And especially when I talk to a lot of people who had been around for the original Fight for Roe and all of that, they would talk about how the movements were so siloed. I remember watching The Janes, which was a movie about abortion before Roe, and they were the environmental rights movement was one thing, civil rights was another, and that was Black men. Environmental rights were white hippies, and they everything was the war movement was white men, and then women just had abortion, and they all kind of worked in their own silos. And now we're seeing all of that coming together because we realize that abortion rights and access to healthcare is environmental rights, is economic rights, is just so embedded in all that we are doing. And so I think that's what really keeps these movements going, is continuing to have to have these conversations, to continue to be curious with how we can work with other movements as well. But also, I think the important thing is understanding the limitations of the work that we do. And that's something particularly at Planned Parenthood that we've really had to do and understand, is when do we step up and when do we step back in a movement. And I think that's an important piece of this as well, to make sure that all of these voices are uplifted and not just one or two.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to make sure everybody heard the question out there. I want to know, how can we continue to work together in these movements and not be siloed into separate movements? Because I think it's a thing that we continue to see. I know I do out in the field, working in the space I'm in. A lot of times, in reproductive justice movements, people are unaware of how connected we are.
Yeah. One of the things that I have noticed, particularly being in the wildlife and conservation space, where you're dealing with natural resources and its impact on everyone and everything, being siloed is completely ineffective, of course, but we're taught in school to be siloed and to think on a one-track mind and to not be collaborative, but instead to be competitive. And I think one of the beautiful things that community-centered approaches do is that you have people with different expertise in community. You have people with different knowledges in community, and you have people who can offer different things: artists, scientists, communicators, right? People who bring so much to the table. And so I think the more we can create, no matter what it is, if it's a task force, if it's a work group, if it's formal, if it's informal, if it's in city government, federal government, no matter where it is, nonprofits, to purposefully create interdisciplinary groups that have people who have both, academic knowledge, but experiential knowledge, right? People who bring different skills to the table so that we can have as diverse of perspectives as we possibly can, because diversity is literally the only way that we survive.
Absolutely. So a couple of questions came in the chat. One question says, what are some common misconceptions that you hear about Black people's involvement / interest in the fight for environmental justice?
I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, go.
I think one of the things that I see often is that it's only about, pollution, like stopping air pollution or stopping water pollution. And whenever I show up as a wildlife biologist, everyone is shocked, right? Like, wait, you're a wildlife expert? And that there really are so many Black communities specifically that are organized, even here in Atlanta, around invasive plant species and managing ecosystems, right? Like, there are so many diverse efforts working in the environmental justice space, and Black people can be experts of all kinds, and that's good and that's okay. So I would say that's probably one of the most common misconceptions on my end.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure you get a lot of shock responses when you tell them your title. Yes, that's unfortunate, but I we know how it is. Another question says, what are some of the unique successes and challenges that you've seen in EJ in organizing in your cities?
I can talk a little bit about this, and I think something that uplifts some of the intersectionality between the two movements is, particularly in Pittsburgh, are the pollutants and the concerns that we're seeing and how it's linking to maternal health outcomes and infant health. And that's been something that's really been a driver here in the city, both as kind of at first, I think, like two separate issues. Like that's how they were approached on the policy level. And I think a lot of people, Black women, Black communities, communities of lower income were raising that these concerns were happening, that the health and well-being of their children and what they were seeing in their health outcomes was like directly tied to what we were seeing with the environmental pollutions from the steel mill and from what we have been, kind of the thing like Pittsburgh is known for, and what are sorry about that. And what are the concerns, how that's manifesting in our young people. And we've really now been able to have a lot of those conversations about these two pieces together and really driving really engaged discussions about environmental health and maternal and infant health. And sometimes it takes like those conversations and something so dire as what we were seeing in the maternal health crisis in Allegheny County to uplift some of these concerns and these intersections.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said it all. Do you have anything to add to that question, Karina?
No, I think that's excellent. I will leave it there.
Yeah, absolutely. One more question says, you spoke to the harmful direct environmental policies that are impacting our communities. What are the ways we seek policy change that ensure the safety and collaboration of our communities?
I think Karina, I'd love to hear if you have like specifics. I think what I always think about when I contemplate policies is so much of it isn't necessarily the policies. Obviously, there's some bad policies that go into effect, and even though we have good policies that go into effect, but sometimes it ends at that advocacy or that like passage of a policy or a law legislation, and we're like, wonderful, it's done. But then the implementation piece is left in the hands of those who are not experiencing this firsthand, who are not in those communities, who are not us, don't look like us. And so then it gets implemented in a way that is so far from what the actual policy was intended to do. And so I think a lot of the work is not only putting forward good policy, but helping at the implementation so it's successful and really reflecting the communities that we're a part of and we serve.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And to add on to that, once legislation passes that, has been advocated, that communities or interest groups have been advocating for the accountability piece, right? So in addition to like the implementation being led by people who are not actually directly or most severely experiencing the problem, oftentimes they're not held accountable to even adhering to the policies that they passed. And so community members, unfortunately, this is a burden that we have to bear, but we have to keep showing up, right? To city council meetings. We have to keep showing up to Department of Natural Resource meetings, right? As constituents to say, this is what
you are now on the books entitled to provide for us or to do for us or to adhere to, which takes so much energy. And so being able to train people in how to do that, I think being literate in how to navigate, especially your local kind of municipal policy system, is so important, and training up youth to be able to carry on the mantle and be part of this accountability system is so critical. And so one of the things that I'm so encouraged by in my community and here in Atlanta where I live is that there are so many youth who are showing up at the State House. There are so many youth who are showing up at City Council who are part of this movement. It's because the elders in our communities have been intentional to raise up youth to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to take one more question. This question says, how can we support this work in Philly and Pittsburgh? How can we support you two in this movement?
I mean, there are so many ways, like so many levels of support. I always joke, like, not everyone wants to come in and be like the CEO of an organization or like wants to do that. But like, even if it is just signing up for like local organizations, newsletters, you know, like we have a newsletter, our partners at Women's Law Project like has a newsletter that talks about like a lot of the policies that we're seeing in these spaces, you know, following these organizations like Planned Parenthood Western Pennsylvania, New Voices, Allegheny Repro, our partners in the abortion care space. Like those are all really simple things that support this work. And of course, like we're not going to say like donations or like showing up, volunteering, like actually coming out there and doing that work, going to Harrisburg or coming to the city county building when we have a rally, when we're doing events that are cross movement, you know, that is all really important. But I think there's just a lot of layers, you know, of how people want to engage. And in the lowest level, just following on social, signing up for a newsletter, staying engaged and informed on the issues is really important, all the way up to volunteering, time, dollars, all of that. And I think all of our sites, you know, all of our information, you can find out how to do that. But just being here and staying engaged, this work is exhausting. So having people here is important, and just keep showing up.
Yes. I'll just second what she said and find there's always someone. I'm not in Philly anymore, but there are always community members who are organized around an environmental issue, without a doubt. And so if you can find who those people are and where those organizations are where you live, and physically show up to a meeting or two, that is incredibly important. And then all that Sydney had shared. And one thing that I'll say is that because, as she said, this work is so exhausting, one of the beautiful things about nature is that it replenishes us. And the more you give yourself space to pay attention to it and to pay attention to creation and all the creatures that share our spaces, you'll find that you're given a little bit more energy to keep going. And that's what keeps me going. And I hope it can keep you going too.
Absolutely. So y'all heard what the scientist said, go outside. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Karina and Sydney. I appreciate both of you and what you have brought to this discussion and what you brought to this event. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. We have reached the end of the show. And I want to thank everyone who was involved. We could not accomplish this event alone. It requires everyone's collective effort, including our partners, keynote speakers, and New Voices staff. I want to personally thank my coworker, Hannah Litchfield, our external affairs manager, for her hard work behind the scenes and for creating our amazing graphics. Thanks so much for watching, and happy Earth Day, y'all.